There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a hotel lobby when something impossible is about to happen. Not the hush of emptiness. The Grand Sejong was never empty. Not at 11 in the morning when Seoul's business elite drifted through its marble corridors like well-dressed currents. This was the silence of held breath, of the universe pausing to take notes. Zara Ellison noticed it a half second before everything changed. She had been standing near the concierge desk, BlackBerry in one hand and a printed itinerary in the other, mentally rehearsing her talking points for tomorrow's signing ceremony. The Hwangdae merger was the largest deal she had ever led, a billion-dollar handshake between an American tech firm and one of Korea's oldest conglomerates, and she had not survived 7 years of grueling solo motherhood and corporate warfare to fumble it on foreign soil. She was going over Clause 17 for the fourth time when she felt it, the prickling, the specific, cellular awareness of being watched. Zara looked up slowly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find, when your body has clocked the danger before your mind catches up. And there, across 40 feet of cream-veined marble, standing absolutely still in the middle of a lobby full of moving people, was a man she had spent 7 years convincing herself she'd forgotten. Kwon Junho. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had simply spent enough years softening the memory of him that reality arrived like a correction. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car, his dark hair swept back, a few threads of silver at his temples that hadn't been there before. He was 31 now. She knew that without calculating it. She knew everything about him the way you know the shape of a scar, not because you keep looking, but because it's always there. His eyes were fixed on her, not with the laziness of a man casually glancing at an attractive woman, with the focused, almost frightening intensity of someone who had been searching a very long time and had just found what they were looking for. Zara's throat closed. Don't react. Don't move. He hasn't seen. Mama. A small hand tugged her sleeve. That man has been staring at you for 2 minutes and 43 seconds. That is statistically abnormal and potentially threatening. Zara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Her son. Her 6-year-old son, Seo Jin, who she called Jin and who called himself whatever he felt like depending on his mood, was standing beside her in a 3-piece suit the color of midnight. His burgundy tie knotted with a precision that frankly embarrassed most adults, holding a small leather briefcase that contained, she knew, a juice box, a tablet loaded with economics podcasts, and a notebook labeled Current Observations. Ignore him, baby, she said quietly, eyes on the floor. Ignoring a potential threat is a suboptimal strategy. Jin tilted his head, studying Junho the way a chess grandmaster studies a board. He hasn't looked away. His posture is rigid. He's experiencing emotional dysregulation of some kind. Jin. But her son had already set down his briefcase with the careful deliberateness of a man who has decided the meeting can wait. He adjusted his tie, he squared his small shoulders, and then 6-year-old Kwon Seo Jin, who had never met his father, who had no idea that the man across the lobby had his own jawline and his own eyes and his own terrifying habit of going completely still when he was thinking, marched across 40 feet of marble like he owned every inch of it. Zara's heart dropped somewhere in the vicinity of the basement. She watched, frozen, as her son stopped exactly 3 feet from Junho and looked up at him. Not with the nervous shuffle of a child approaching a stranger, with the measured, unruffled calm of someone conducting a preliminary assessment. "Excuse me, sir," Jin said, his voice carrying the particular crispness of a child who had been told too many times that he spoke too formally and had decided that was everyone else's problem. "Why are you staring at my mother as if she owes you something?" 7 years. Let's go back 7 years, to the version of Zara Ellison who was 22 years old and absolutely certain she knew exactly what she was doing. She had finished her 2nd year of law school at Georgetown when her father, Raymond Ellison, corporate attorney, 2 decades in international trade law, the most ethical man she had ever met, got the call. The Kwon family wanted him, not as outside counsel, not as a consultant, as their permanent legal architect, the man who would structure their empire's dealings with the Western world. The Kwons were not simply wealthy. In Korea, that word, wealthy, was too small a coat for what they were. They owned shipping ports and broadcasting networks and real estate from Busan to Jeju. They had political relationships that were never discussed at dinner parties, but were understood to exist the way weather is understood to exist. And at the center of it all, being groomed to inherit an empire so vast it had its own gravitational pull, was Kwon Junho. 24 years old. Devastatingly composed. Fluent in 4 languages, which Zara had confirmed by eavesdropping on 3 separate conversations and feeling unreasonably competitive about it. Her father had brought her to Seoul as his assistant. Learn how law actually works, he'd said, not the theory. The practice. And Zara, who had always wanted both, had agreed. She had not agreed to fall in love. That part was unscheduled. It started with an argument, because the best things usually do. There had been a dinner at the Kwon estate, all glass and stone and deliberately understated opulence, and someone at the table had made a comment about the family's acquisition of a mid-sized shipping company. A comment so casually callous about the 300 workers whose livelihoods hung in the balance that Zara had gripped her wine glass and thought very hard about saying nothing. She said something. Not loudly. She was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her that volume was for people who hadn't prepared their argument. She made her point precisely, citing 3 precedents from international labor law, and then she looked back at her plate and waited to be politely dismissed. Instead, the man across the table, Kwon Junho, who had been watching her with an expression she couldn't yet read, said, "She's right. Nyen, pulled a restructuring proposal. We're renegotiating the labor terms." The table had gone quiet in a way that suggested this was unusual. Later, on the estate's terrace, Junho had found her. "You weren't supposed to speak," he said. Not accusatory. Observational. The way she would come to learn he said most things. "I'm aware," Zara said. "You did it anyway." The alternative was agreeing with something wrong. He had looked at her then, really looked, the kind of looking that rearranges something, and said, "In my world, most people choose the alternative. I'm not from your world." No, he'd agreed, and something in his voice had suggested this was exactly the point. "You're not." That was how it started. Conversations that lasted past midnight. Debates about ethics and law and the gap between what things were and what they should be. He challenged her in ways that made her sharper, and she challenged him in ways that, she understood later, were genuinely new to a man who had been surrounded his entire life by people whose job was to agree with him. 6 months. Secret and bright and fragile, like something grown in a greenhouse. She snuck out of family dinners to meet him in the car. He disappeared from board meetings to call her. They existed in the small hours, in the spaces between his obligations and her father's watchful eyes. And then, she missed her period. The test happened in the bathroom of a coffee shop 2 blocks from the university. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to take it 3 times, convinced she was misreading, convinced the universe had misread, convinced something had made an error. But the universe was not confused. She told Junho that night. She had planned a speech. She had mentally rehearsed 3 different versions of it on the subway ride to meet him. What came out was 2 words, "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was not cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel silence has edges you can grip. This silence was smooth and unreadable, and Junho sat very still with his hands on the steering wheel and his face somewhere she couldn't reach. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "How far along?" 5, maybe 6 weeks. And then, quiet enough that she had to lean toward him, "What do you want to do?" "Not we. Not us. Not I'm terrified, but I love you and we will figure this out together," which was the sentence she had been bracing herself to hear. Just, what do you want to do? Clean and clinical, like she had brought him a problem requiring a solution rather than a person carrying something that was half of both of them. She had whispered that she didn't know. He had said he needed a week to think. He had driven her home and kissed her forehead at the door in a way that felt like a goodbye she didn't have a name for yet. 3 days later, her father sat at the foot of her bed with a face like a closed fist, and her mother stood in the doorway holding a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and Zara understood before anyone spoke that the walls had ears in the Kwan estate. "You're pregnant." Her father. Not a question. "Yes." "And the father?" "He said he needed time." Her father had looked at her mother. Something passed between them in that look. Years of understanding. The private language of two people who have survived things together. Then her mother had set down the tea and walked to the closet and started pulling out luggage. "We leave tonight," her father said. "Dad." Zara. His voice had never sounded like that before. Like fear wearing the costume of authority. "I have spent 20 years learning how families like the Kwans handle complications. You are not a complication. You are my daughter. We leave tonight." They were on a plane by midnight. They paid cash for 3 hotels in Brussels before her father was satisfied no one was following. They settled in Atlanta 6 weeks later, then Chicago the following month, then Chicago stayed. Her father sent his resignation by email, brief, no explanation, and the Kwan chapter of their lives was sealed in silence. Zara gave birth to a boy in a hospital room on a Tuesday in November. He was 8 pounds and furious about it, which she would later recognize as characteristic. She named him Seo Jin, the Korean half of his name a private act of acknowledgement, a refusal to erase the part of him that came from somewhere she couldn't tell him about yet. His American name was James, but he had corrected that himself at age 4. "I'm Jin. James doesn't fit." And she had let him have it because she had learned early that arguing with her son about identity was like arguing with the tide. She went back to law school with a newborn strapped to her chest. She studied during his naps and took exams with him in the campus childcare room and passed the bar on her first attempt, and then she climbed. Because climbing was the only direction she knew. Corporate law. Mergers and acquisitions. She built a reputation that had nothing to do with who she'd loved in Seoul, and everything to do with being the sharpest person in any room she entered. By the time Jin was 6, Zara Ellison was someone. And Jin, God help her Jin, was exactly someone too. Just not someone she had planned on. At 18 months, he had organized his toys by category and frequency of use. At 3, he had informed his preschool teacher that her approach to phonics was inefficient and offered a revision. At 4, he had read his first chapter book and asked why the main character made such consistently poor financial decisions. At 5, he had started wearing suits because, he explained with the calm certainty of someone who has given this serious thought, "Presentation is communication, Mama, and I have things to communicate." He wore those suits to kindergarten. He negotiated his bedtime using precedent from her actual cases. He read the financial pages at breakfast and left her little notes about interesting market movements. He could read her face like a legal brief, her habits, her micro-expressions, the way she tapped her pen exactly 3 times before canceling a meeting or touched the ends of her hair when she was unhappy with it. He knew everything before she said it, and he watched her with those dark, calculating eyes that were not her eyes, that had never been her eyes, and her mother would sometimes look at Jin and say, softly, "He's his father's son, baby. You can't outrun genetics." Zara had spent 6 years successfully not thinking about that. Then the Hwangdae Lim deal landed on her desk and Seoul became unavoidable. Her boss called it career-defining. Zara called it a test she hadn't studied for, disguised as a professional opportunity. She spent 3 days inventing reasons to decline. Fictional illness, a scheduling conflict that didn't exist, a brief and shameful consideration of simply quitting. Before accepting what she already knew, there was no way out of this one. She booked the flights. She prayed Seoul was large enough to swallow one specific man. Jin insisted on coming. Not because she told him about Junho, she had never told him about Junho, but because Jin noticed everything, including the fact that his mother had checked their itinerary 6 times in 48 hours and was sleeping badly, and he had concluded that she needed supervision. "You're anxious about Seoul," he told her, without making it a question. I should come. You'll be bored, she said. He had given her the look, the one that said he could see through every argument she was about to make, and was waiting for her to save them both some time. So Jin came. In his navy suit, with his briefcase and his juice box and his notebook full of what he called business observations, he sat on the plane beside her and read an article about Seoul's public transit infrastructure and helpfully summarized it for her. They had arrived that morning. The hotel was beautiful, and Zara hated every inch of it. She had checked them in with shaking hands while Jin stood beside her and observed, with clinical precision, that her cortisol levels seemed elevated. And then, 11 minutes after they'd come down to the lobby, she had felt the prickling. And looked up. And found Junho. And her son, her impossible, perceptive suit-wearing son, had taken one look at the stranger staring at his mother and gone to deal with him. Junho had not moved. Later, he would tell her that he couldn't have moved if he'd tried. That his legs had simply received the wrong signal from a brain that had shorted out entirely, caught between the sight of Zara, 7 years older, more beautiful, radiating the specific confidence of a woman who has built something real, and the child marching toward him across the marble. The child who had his exact eyes, down to the slight upturn at the outer corners that his own mother had always called your grandfather's eyes, a genetic inheritance he had apparently passed along without being present for a single day of the passing. The child who stopped in front of him, 3 feet precisely, as if he had calculated the appropriate professional distance, and looked up without flinching. "Excuse me, sir. Why are you staring at my mother as if she owes you something?" Junho's mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out. In 31 years of life, in boardrooms and courtrooms and conversations with politicians and rivals and people who had tried to intimidate him and people who had succeeded, Kwon Junho had never been entirely speechless. He prided himself on this. Language was the first tool of power, and he had always had command of it. The 6-year-old had taken it from him in 4 seconds. "I asked you a question," the boy said. Patient. Slightly disappointed that he had to follow up. Junho said, "Because it was the only thing that surfaced, I apologize. I thought I recognized someone." The boy's eyes narrowed. "You recognize my mother?" Yes. From where?" "We worked together." A long time ago, the boy considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing contradictory testimony. "That doesn't explain why you're still staring. You've been staring for 2 minutes and 43 seconds. A pause. "I'm timing you." Junho almost smiled. He couldn't help it. "What's your name? Why do you want to know?" "Curiosity." Curiosity without established context is a social vulnerability, the boy said. "I don't give my name to strangers." He tilted his head, and there it was again, the tilt, the exact angle, the gesture Junho made himself when he was reevaluating. "Though you don't seem dangerous, you seem confused. And sad." Junho felt something move in his chest. "You're very perceptive." "I know," said the boy. "My mother says I get it from her. I think she's partially correct." And then Zara arrived, her hand finding her son's shoulder, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm so sorry, She stopped when their eyes met. The professional composure she had assembled so beautifully cracked right down the middle. "Zara," Junho said. "Junho." Her chin went up. He recognized that too, the gesture she made when she was afraid and refused to let it show. Small world. He looked at the boy. He could not stop looking at the boy. "Is this your son?" "Yes." "How old?" The pause lasted exactly 1 beat too long. 6. He did the math in 0.3 seconds and felt the ground rearrange itself beneath his feet. 6, he repeated. The boy looked between them with the sharp, interested attention of someone watching a deposition unfold. "Do you two know each other?" "We used to work together," Zara said quickly. "A long time ago." "You're both exhibiting elevated stress responses," the boy said. Increased respiratory rate. Micro-expressions indicating concealment. He looked at Junho. You're doing the thing where someone is trying very hard not to react to something. I've read about it. It's called the Duchenne suppression response. He looked at his mother. You're doing the thing where you're scared. A pause. Quieter. You don't get scared, Mama. The lobby had grown very still around them. Jin, Zara said, go get your tablet. I need to speak with. Kwon, the boy said, reading the name on the hotel's business directory board mounted near the elevator bank. His eyes moved between the directory and Junho with the systematic thoroughness of someone cross-referencing. Kwon, as in Kwon Group? Junho said, carefully, yes. The conglomerate. Shipping, media, real estate. Jin pulled out his tablet. From where? Junho had no idea and began typing. I follow the Kwon Group's quarterly filings. Your maritime division is underperforming relative to your media sector. The diversification strategy has merit, but the implementation timeline is aggressive. He looked up. I have notes if you're interested. A long pause. Junho looked at Zara. Zara looked like she was considering whether the floor could swallow her. He's 6, Junho said, not quite a question. Every single day, she said. They ended up in the hotel restaurant, not because Zara wanted to. Not because Junho asked, exactly. Because Jin had looked at them both with the mild disdain of a person who has watched 2 executives make a scene in a conference room and said, if you're going to have this conversation, and you clearly are, you should do it somewhere you're not embarrassing yourselves, and then walked toward the restaurant with his briefcase, leaving them to follow. They followed. The private dining room Junho arranged was quiet and wood-paneled and felt, Zara thought, like a room designed for exactly this kind of conversation, the kind where everything changes and you have to sit still while it does. Jin set his briefcase on the seat beside him, opened his notebook to a fresh page, and looked between them. Ground rules, he said. First, no yelling. It's counterproductive and hard on the ears. Second, complete honesty only. I already know more than you think I do, so lying is a waste of time. Third, you already know more than we think you do? Zara said. The timeline adds up. Jin said simply. He's Korean, my name is Korean, I look like him, and you've been scared since we landed. He tapped his pen on his notebook. I'm 6, not oblivious. The silence that followed was the kind that lands like a dropped weight. He's not wrong, Junho said quietly. I know he's not wrong, Zara said. He's never wrong. It's exhausting. I can hear you, Jin said. I know, said both of them. Simultaneously. Jin made a note. You already have synchronized responses. That's a good sign. The waiter brought water and a bread basket that Jin examined with the critical eye of a restaurant inspector before declaring the presentation acceptable, but the portion size mathematically inefficient for 3 people. Junho ordered tea. Zara ordered nothing and then changed her mind and ordered wine, which arrived and sat untouched in front of her while she looked at her son and tried to find a place to start. Ask what you want to ask, Jin told her. I can see you calculating. He looked at Junho. She does that. Runs through every possible version of a conversation before she starts it. I think it's because she's a lawyer. I know, Junho said. She used to do it 7 years ago too. Something crossed Zara's face. There and gone. A weather system moving through. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Junho said, with the matter-of-fact honesty of a man who has had 7 years to stop being ashamed of it. Jun observed this exchange with the detached professionalism of a documentary filmmaker. Dad, he said, trying out the word like he was testing its structural integrity. Can I call you that? Or is there a preferred alternative? Junho looked at his son for a long moment. His son. The word was still doing something seismic inside him. Shifting tectonic plates he hadn't known were mobile. You can call me whatever you'd like, Junho said. Dad seems premature given that we've been acquainted for approximately 20 minutes, Jin said thoughtfully. But Junho is too informal for someone I've just met, and Mr. Kwon is what I call people I don't know. What about, he considered. Kwanzi, until we establish a working relationship? Junho's throat moved. That works. Good. Jin wrote something in his notebook. Now, I have questions. Of course you do, Zara murmured. First, do you speak Korean at home? Yes, Junho said. And English, French, and Mandarin. I only speak English and some French, Jin said. That's a gap I intend to address. He wrote it down. Second, can you play chess? Since I was 5, what's your preferred opening? Rui Lopez. Jin made a note with the energy of someone adding a candidate to a short list. I'll research the counter strategies before we meet again. Third, he paused. Were you looking for us? The question landed quietly. Junho didn't look away from Jin's face when he answered. Yes, he said. For 7 years, Jin looked at his mother. Zara was looking at her wine glass. Why didn't you find us sooner? Jin asked. Your grandfather was very thorough, Junho said. He hid you well. I used every resource I had, private investigators, forensic accountants, tracking international legal filings, and couldn't find a trace. His voice was even, but it cost him something to keep it that way. 6 months ago, the Wang De Lim deal crossed my desk. The American legal team was filed in the preliminary documents. Third name on the list, Zara Ellison, lead M&A attorney, Chicago. He paused. I cleared my entire schedule. Got to this hotel 3 hours before your check-in and waited. Jin absorbed this. That's significant effort. Your worst significant effort, Junho said. Both of you. Zara finally looked up. Her eyes were bright, and she was doing the jaw-tightening thing she did when she refused to cry in public. You should have told me what you were planning, she said. That week. When I told you I was pregnant, you said you needed a week, and I thought. I know what you thought. Junho set down his teacup. You thought I was deciding whether to keep you or discard you, whether you were a problem or an asset. His voice was steady, but it had an edge under it, something old and unresolved. That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? Planning how to tell my father, Junho said. How to frame it so that he couldn't touch you. How to make you legitimate before he found out, and tried to make you the opposite. He looked at his hands. I was 24 and my father terrified me, though I would never have admitted that. I thought I had time. I thought a week was nothing. He paused. I had a ring. I'd bought it the day after you told me. The table went very quiet. A ring, Zara said. Yes, you were going to. Propose. Yes. And present you to my family as a done fact. Fait accompli. His jaw tightened. I knew my father couldn't undo a proposal once it was made publicly. I was going to make it public. A long breath. And then 3 days later, your father's resignation arrived in our legal office. No explanation. No forwarding contact. You were simply gone. Zara stared at him. I thought you changed your mind, she said. Quietly, like something she'd been holding for 7 years. I thought you got scared, and then we made it easy for you by leaving. I thought you used me, Junho said, with the same quiet. I thought you'd never loved me at all, that you'd seen what was coming and decided I wasn't worth the complication. They looked at each other across 7 years of wrong conclusions. We were both idiots, Jin observed. Jin, Zara started. I'm providing an objective assessment, he said. You made major life decisions based on incomplete information without attempting to verify. That's a logical failure, not a moral one. The appropriate response is to acknowledge it and adjust. He looked between them. So. Adjusting. What are the proposed terms going forward? Junho pressed his lips together. Zara made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had tried harder. Kid, Junho said, you are remarkable. I know, Jin said. It's both a gift and a significant responsibility. He picked up his pen. Terms. Go. What followed was something that Zara would later describe to her mother as the strangest negotiation I have ever participated in, and I have closed a $1 billion deal. Jin mediated with the impartiality of a professional arbitrator, taking notes asking clarifying questions and occasionally ruling an argument out of order when he felt the emotional temperature getting unproductive. His ground rules held. Nobody yelled, though Zara came close twice when old hurt surfaced faster than she expected. Junho kept his voice measured, with the practiced discipline of a man who had learned that the quieter he spoke, the more people listened. By the time the food arrived, which Jin had ordered for all three of them based on his research into nutritional optimization, and which, Zara had to admit, was better than what she would have chosen, they had established the following. Junho wanted to be in Jin's life, not as a visitor, not as a financial footnote, as a father. Jin wanted to know Junho, not immediately, not blindly. On a conditional trial basis with quarterly evaluation, he specified, which made Junho laugh genuinely for the first time, a surprised, unguarded sound that rearranged Zara's chest in ways she was not prepared for. Zara wanted Junho to be in Jin's life. She had always wanted that, underneath the fear. She simply hadn't known it was possible to have it without it being dangerous. My father died 3 years ago, Junho told her, when the question of the family came up. I run the Quan Group now, which means I make the rules. Power doesn't automatically create safety, Zara said. No, but I've spent 3 years restructuring the parts of our business that operated in shadows, making them legal. Shutting down the arrangements my father made with people who specialized in, he chose his words, persuasion. He looked at her. I did that because I was looking for you, and I wanted to have something worth offering when I found you. Jin looked up from his notebook. You restructured an entire conglomerate's ethical framework on the chance that you might find us? Yes. A pause. That's statistically irrational, Jin said, but also kind of admirable. He made a note. I'm upgrading my assessment. From what to what? Junho asked. From potential to promising. They didn't resolve everything that first afternoon. Zara was too careful for that. Too much her father's daughter to let hope outrun reality. But when Jin announced he was tired, the only truly 6-year-old thing he did all day, suddenly drooping at the edges like a plant that needed water, and Zara took him upstairs, Junho asked if they could talk. She met him in the hotel bar at 9 o'clock, after Jin was asleep. He texted me before you came down, Junho said, showing her his phone. Zara looked at the screen. Her son had obtained Junho's number, she genuinely had no idea how, and sent a single message, she'll overthink this. She does that. Don't let her talk herself out of what she actually wants, Jay. How does a 6-year-old know how to do this? Junho asked. I've asked myself that question every day for 4 years, Zara said. They talked until 2 in the morning. Not about the future, not yet. About the past. About what happened and what each of them had understood from it, and how two people can experience the same events and build entirely different narratives that both feel like the truth, because they are both, in their own broken way, the truth. Zara cried once, not from sadness. Exactly. From the specific grief of realizing how long she had been carrying something she could have put down sooner if she'd only known. Junho didn't cry. He sat very still in that way of his and listened, and when she was done he said, I'm sorry I asked for a week when I should have acted in an hour. I was trained to take time with decisions. I forgot that some things aren't decisions. I'm sorry I disappeared without trying to reach you first, she said. I was so scared that I let the fear do my thinking. You were protecting him, Junho said. Everything you did, you were protecting him. I can't be angry at that. You can be angry at me, she said. You're allowed, I was, he said. For years. It's not useful anymore. Zara looked at him across the small table and thought about the girl who had run away from this city 7 years ago, terrified and pregnant and utterly alone. She had built herself from the wreckage of that running. She was proud of what she'd built. She didn't regret it. But she was tired of running. I don't know what this is, she said finally. What we are. What we could be. Neither do I, Junho said. But I know what I'd like it to be. When you're ready. Her phone lit up on the table. A text from Jin, who was apparently not as asleep as she had assumed. Mom, I have analyzed this situation at length. You still love him. He clearly still loves you. The complicating factors are significant but not insurmountable. Please make a decision before I have to intervene more directly. I need to sleep. Jae Junho read it over her shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then, he really is remarkable. He's a menace, Zara said. Yes, Junho agreed. Both things are true. She didn't kiss him that night, but she sat with him until the bar closed, and when she walked back to her room she felt, for the first time in 7 years, like the ground was solid under her feet. The next morning, Jin woke at 6:15, dressed himself in his second-best suit because the Navy is for important meetings and this qualifies, and created a document on his tablet titled Framework for Paternal Relationship Development, Phase 1 Assessment. He presented it to Junho over breakfast with the seriousness of a corporate pitch. I've identified 4 core areas, Jin said, turning the tablet so Junho could see the color-coded chart. Intellectual compatibility, emotional consistency, sense of humor quality, and what I'm calling presence reliability, meaning whether you do what you say you'll do. Junho studied the chart. Where do I currently stand? Unknown. That's why this is phase 1. Jin tapped the table. I'll need data. So I propose the following. You visit Chicago once every 2 weeks. We'll use those visits to collect information across all 4 categories. At the 3-month mark, I'll conduct a formal evaluation. And if I don't pass? Jin considered this with genuine seriousness. I'd want to understand why, whether the failure was structural or circumstantial. A pause. You'd get a remediation period. That's generous. I'm trying to be fair, Jin said. I don't have prior data on how fathers work. I'm building the model as I go. Junho looked at his son, at the precise knot of his tie, the careful set of his small shoulders, the eyes that were too old and too sharp and completely devastatingly familiar, and felt something he didn't have an efficient word for. A compound feeling, grief for the 6 years he'd missed, and a joy so clean and unexpected that it felt almost physical. Jin, he said, can I tell you something? Yes. I know I wasn't there. I know you had to grow up without me, and I know your mother was enough. More than enough. And I'm not asking you to need me. I don't have the right to ask for that yet. He paused, but I'd like to earn it. If you'll let me. Jin was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. That's an acceptable opening position, he said. We'll proceed to phase 1. He extended his small hand across the table. Junho shook it. Zara, who had been watching from the other side of the table with her coffee cup pressed to her lips, turned away before either of them could see her face do the thing it was doing. The signing ceremony went perfectly. Zara closed the Hwangdae Lim deal with the efficiency she was known for, and if any of her Korean counterparts noticed that the head of the Kwon Group was present in the gallery, ostensibly for an unrelated meeting, they were too professional to mention it. Jin sat in the back row of the conference room gallery with a visitor's badge and his notebook and watched the entire proceeding with intense focus, and afterward told her, your command of the room was excellent. Your pacing on clause 42 was slightly rushed, but I think you were reacting to time pressure. Overall, 8.4 out of 10. You gave me an 8.4. It's a very good score, Jin said. My curve is steep. That evening, Junho drove them to the airport. He stood at the departure's entrance with his hands in his pockets and the particular stillness of a man who was choosing, very deliberately, not to say everything he was thinking. 2 weeks, Jin said, looking up at him. Chicago. Don't be late, he paused. Also, I looked up the Rui Lopez counter-strategies on the plane last night. I'll be ready. I would expect nothing less, Junho said. Jin nodded, collected his briefcase, and walked toward the entrance, then stopped, turned around, and came back. He stood in front of Junho for a moment, looking up at him with an expression Zara had never seen on her son's face before. Something open, something undefended. Then he hugged him, brief and stiff and slightly awkward, the hug of someone who had decided something and was doing it before he could talk himself out of it. Junho hugged him back with the careful tenderness of a man holding something he didn't want to break. He looked at Zara over Jin's shoulder. She looked back. 2 weeks, she said. He nodded, and she turned around and walked into the airport, one hand finding Jin's, and felt behind her eyes the specific sting of something ending and something else, fragile and new, just beginning. The first Chicago visit was scheduled for a Saturday. Jin had prepared. This was not surprising. Jin prepared for everything with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that the difference between a good outcome and a great one was almost always in the groundwork. What was slightly alarming was the scale of it. He had created a weekend itinerary, color-coded, laminated, distributed to all relevant parties via email the Thursday prior, that included scheduled activities, meal times, and what he called unstructured bonding windows, which he explained were important for organic relationship development but need to be time-boxed so they don't drift. He had reorganized the apartment's common spaces to ensure optimal flow for 3-person occupancy. He had made a grocery list based on what he had learned of Junho's dietary preferences from a 16-minute phone call conducted Wednesday evening, which Zara had overheard from the kitchen while pretending not to. "You called him?" she'd asked, when Jin had emerged from his bedroom. "Preparatory research," Jin said. "I needed data." He consulted his tablet. He doesn't like mushrooms either. "We have this in common. It's a bonding point." Junho arrived at 11, 3 minutes early. Jin answered the door with a clipboard. "You're early," Jin said. "I appreciate it. Punctuality suggests respect for other people's time." He stepped back. "Please come in. I'll conduct the orientation." The tour of their apartment took 9 minutes, which Zara considered mercifully brief. Jin pointed out where things were, identified the Wi-Fi password, and noted the locations of emergency exits, which was a level of preparedness Junho seemed to find both charming and slightly unnerving. "Your room," Junho said, standing in Jin's doorway, taking in the small desk with its neat stacks of files, the chessboard already set up. The wardrobe that was, yes, entirely suits. "You really do." "Presentation communicates intention," Jin said. "I have things to communicate." "Who told you that?" "I worked it out myself." "But Mama agrees with it." "Of course she does," Junho murmured, with a warmth in his voice that was private and directed at Zara, who was in the kitchen pretending to look for something in the refrigerator. They played chess for 3 hours. Junho won the first 2 games, and Jin recorded each move in his notebook with an annotation system he had apparently invented. The third game went 47 moves before Jin captured Junho's queen and then his king and 4 more. And the look on Junho's face was not a man losing to a child. It was a man recognizing something. "You changed your approach in the middle," Junho said. "You were patterning," Jin said. "You relied on the same 2 structures when your opponent is new. I mapped it in Game 1 and tested my theory in Game 2. He reset the board. Game 3 was the application. "You beat me," Junho said, "by learning me." "Yes," Jin said simply. They looked at each other, same eyes, same angle, the same slight smile that was trying not to be more. "I'm going to have to work very hard to beat you," Junho said. "Yes," Jin agreed. "But you'll improve. You're coachable." The visits became the structure of everything. Every other weekend, Junho flew from Seoul to Chicago. Sometimes they went to museums. Jin preferred science and natural history, had strong opinions about exhibit curation, and once left a comment card suggesting improvements to the Field Museum's plate tectonics display. Sometimes they stayed in, playing chess, working through programming tutorials Junho had recommended, watching Korean films that Jin consumed with a running commentary of cultural analysis. Zara watched them from the periphery, giving them room, protecting the space in which something was slowly growing. And she watched Junho watch her. She had forgotten, or perhaps allowed herself to forget, what it felt like to be seen by someone who was genuinely paying attention. Junho noticed things. Not with Jin's clinical precision, but with a quieter intelligence. He remembered how she took her coffee without being told twice, moved out of her way without making a production of it, asked about her cases with the specificity of someone who had actually listened the last time. He did not try to fix things. He did not offer advice she hadn't asked for. He simply showed up, twice a month, without fail. Through a blizzard in February that delayed his flight 6 hours, and he rebooked and showed up at 9 p.m. Anyway, bringing kimchi fried rice from the only Korean restaurant Jin had approved and sitting on the kitchen floor because it was already past bedtime and they didn't want to disturb the sleep schedule. He showed up. That, Zara was learning, was everything. 3 months in, they were washing dishes after dinner, Jin strategically in his room, which she suspected was strategic, when Junho said, without preamble, "I miss you when I'm not here." She set down the bowl she was drying. Junho, not asking for anything, he said. "I just wanted you to know." He was looking at the window above the sink, the Chicago skyline scattered against the dark. "I miss the way you argue. I miss watching you think." A pause. "I miss being the person you tell things to." The dish towel in her hands was doing no work. "I'm scared," she said. The truth plainly, because Junho had always responded to plain truth. "I know," he said. "You're allowed to be scared. I'm not asking you to stop." He turned to look at her. "I'm asking you to be scared and still let me be here. Because I'm not going anywhere. I'm choosing this. Every 2 weeks I'm getting on a plane and choosing this. I'll keep doing it until you either tell me to stop or tell me to stay permanently. Junho, one step at a time." He said. "That's all." And from the hallway, Jin's voice floated out with the serene certainty of a person who has been monitoring this situation. "The appropriate response is yes, Mama. I've run the analysis. You are not supposed to be listening," Zara called. "I'm gathering data," Jin said. "It's not the same thing." She started laughing, which was the only appropriate response to being coached through a romantic moment by her 6-year-old son, and Junho laughed too, and when she looked at him in the middle of that laughter, she thought, there it is. There's the reason. She kissed him. Not dramatically. Not with the weight of 7 years explicitly behind it. Just, she stepped forward and kissed him. The way you do something you've been deciding for a long time and have finally decided. When they separated, Jin could be heard, from his bedroom, saying with quiet satisfaction, "Noted." Updating the timeline. 4 months later, Junho raised the subject of his family. Zara's first instinct was the same one it always was, a cold contraction in the chest, her body's cellular memory of fear. But she had learned, in 4 months of watching Junho choose her, to give her second instinct a chance to speak. "Your father is gone," she said. 3 years, Junho confirmed. "My uncle is the senior family member, but the Kwan group is mine. I make the decisions." He took her hand. "My mother wants to meet Jin. She's asked several times." "What is your mother like?" Junho considered. "Exacting, proud, difficult to impress." A pause. "She cried when I told her about Jin. She said," his voice changed slightly, "she said that she'd always hoped I'd find you." Zara looked at him. "She knew about you," Junho said. 7 years ago. "She'd seen you at dinners. She told me, the week after you disappeared, that she thought I'd made a mistake letting you go." His jaw tightened. "My father overruled her on most things." "She didn't. She wanted you to find us. She wanted me to be happy," Junho said simply. "I don't think she always agreed with my father's methods." He squeezed her hand. "Come to Seoul. 1 visit. You can leave the moment you want to." He looked at her. "I'll be there the whole time. Jin will have opinions," Zara said. "Jin always has opinions. He'll probably prepare a briefing document. I would expect nothing less." Jin's briefing document was 12 pages. He presented it to them the Tuesday before the flight. Divided into sections: Kwan family composition and hierarchy, known risk factors, mitigation strategies, and acceptable outcomes. He had researched Korean familial customs with the rigor of an anthropology student and had written out, phonetically, 6 phrases he intended to use to demonstrate cultural respect. "This is remarkably thorough," Junho said. "I believe in preparation," Jin said. Also, I'd like to learn to cook one Korean dish before we go, as a relationship-building gesture toward your mother. What does she like? Junho looked at him for a long moment. Japchae, he said finally. Her favorite? Then we'll make japchae, Jin said, pulling up a recipe on his tablet. Saturday. Mama can supervise. You can teach. They made japchae on Saturday. It took 2 hours, and Jin took notes the entire time and asked 17 questions about the history of the dish, the chemistry of the glass noodles, and whether the recipe had changed across generations of Junho's family. By the end, the result was edible, and Jin deemed it satisfactory for a first attempt, and Zara took a photo of the two of them standing over the pot. Junho behind Jin with his hands guiding the smaller hands, both of them looking down with the same focused expression. She looked at that photo for a long time that night. The Kwan estate was exactly as Zara remembered. Monumental. Silent in the way of places that have absorbed too much history. She stood at the gate and felt 22 again for exactly 3 seconds before Jin took her hand, and then she remembered who she was now. Junho's family was assembled in the grand hall. His mother, Kwon Hyeja, sat at the center of the room like the comma around which everything else organized itself. Silver-haired, immaculately dressed, with the particular posture of a woman who had spent a lifetime deciding which battles were worth her energy and which were not. His uncle, various cousins, the assembled machinery of family expectations, all of them watching as a 30-year-old black woman from Atlanta walked into the hall of the Kwan family's Seoul estate, holding her 6-year-old son's hand. Jin stepped forward. He bowed precisely at the angle he had measured from a video he'd studied 3 times. Annyeonghaseyo, he said, with the careful pronunciation of someone who has practiced every vowel. Je iramun Kwon Seo Jinimnida. My name is Kwon Seo Jin. Manaseo Bangapsyumnida. I'm glad to meet you. The room was very quiet. Kwon Hyeja looked at her grandson, the child who had her son's eyes and her father-in-law's jaw and something else. Something that was entirely his own, and something happened in her face. Something that moved through, composed, and arrived at undone. Briefly, before she gathered it back. Your Korean is careful, she said in English. My pronunciation needs work, Jin said. I've been studying for 3 months. I hope to improve significantly with practice. He paused. I understand you like japchae. I learned to make it. I brought some. He reached into his briefcase and produced a carefully wrapped container. I made it with my father's guidance. Silence. Then Kwon Hyeja looked at her son, and Junho met her eyes, and whatever passed between them in that look was the compressed shorthand of a mother and her child who have always understood each other beneath the formal surface. She looked back at Jin. You planned this. I believe in preparation, Jin said. She laughed. It sounded surprised, like something she hadn't expected from herself. Sit down, she said. Tell me about yourself. All of it. The uncle caused trouble, because uncles in these stories always do. He made a comment about legitimacy, about bloodlines and the appearance of propriety, about whether an unacknowledged child and a foreign woman constituted a proper heir. Jin spoke before Junho could. With respect, Jin said, and the phrase had weight in his mouth, not the hollow weight of a diplomatic opener, but the actual weight of a 6-year-old who understood what respect meant and was extending it as a measured choice. I'm not asking for your acknowledgement. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm here because my father wanted me to know his family, and because it seemed important to him. He looked at the uncle with the mild, measuring gaze of someone much older. Whether that's acknowledged or not doesn't change what I am. I'm Kwon Seo Jin. I'm also James Seo Jin Ellison. Both things are true, and neither requires your permission. The room was very quiet. Junho's mother pressed her lips together in what was not quite a smile and was definitely the precursor to one. He argues like a lawyer, someone murmured. His mother is a lawyer, Junho said, and he's better at it than most. The uncle said nothing further on the subject. By the end of the visit, Jin had collected a grandmother who intended to video call him weekly and teach him Korean through a selection of family stories, a second cousin who had promised to teach him Taekwondo, and the uncle's grudging, barely audible admission that the boy had potential. He had also informed Junho's mother at dinner that her Jap-K ratio was slightly off and suggested an adjustment to the seasoning, which she had received with an expression of profound affrontedness, followed by the admission, 4 minutes later, that he was correct. "He's going to be insufferable in this family," Hyeji said to Zara, while Jin was occupied explaining his views on the Kwan Group's media strategy to a beleaguered cousin. "He's already insufferable in ours," Zara said. "You get used to it." Hyeja looked at her. "You raised him alone, yes, and you came back here to a family you had every reason to fear." "He wanted to know where he came from," Zara said simply. "I didn't have the right to keep that from him." Something in Hyeja's face shifted. "My son," she said, "spent 7 years becoming someone worth coming back to. I think he was doing it for you, though he'd probably argue it was for the business." She paused. "I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry it took this long." "So am I," Zara said. They married in the spring. This was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention, and Jin had been paying attention from the beginning. He had, in fact, begun the venue research immediately following the engagement, which happened on a Tuesday evening in the Kwan Estate Garden after dinner, without an audience except the particular stillness of a place where something important is about to happen. Junho had kept the ring for 7 years. It was simple. A single stone, set low. The kind of ring chosen by someone who knew exactly who they were buying it for. "I had this made," he said, "the week after you told me you were pregnant. I carried it for 7 years. He looked at her. "That sounds either romantic or obsessive, and I'm genuinely uncertain which." "Both," Zara said. "Yes," Junho agreed. "Both." She said yes before he finished asking, which he later said was the most Zara Ellison thing she had ever done, preempting the whole speech, and she said that if he had wanted her to let him finish, he should have gotten to the point faster. And Jin, from inside the house where he was definitely not watching, sent them both a text that, "Read, congratulations. I'll begin the venue research tonight." J. The wedding was elegant, cross-cultural, and almost entirely organized by a 6-year-old who had strong opinions about flower arrangements and stronger opinions about the structural integrity of multi-tiered cakes. 200 guests. A blended ceremony that moved between Korean and American traditions with the fluidity of something that had been choreographed by someone who understood both cultures and had done extensive research. "The cake is structurally sound," Jin told Zara the morning of, with the gravity of a building inspector signing off on a skyscraper. "That was my main concern," she said, straightening his bow tie. He looked up at her. Something in his face was very still, very young, the 6-year-old underneath all the competence suddenly surfacing. "Mama," he said. "Can I tell you something? Always. I used to wonder why we didn't have a dad. Other kids had them." He paused. "And I know you couldn't tell me why. I know you were protecting me." He swallowed. "But I want you to know that I understand it now. What you did. And I think you were brave." Zara's carefully applied makeup was in serious jeopardy. "Baby." "Also," Jin said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a small velvet box, "I got you something. Dad helped. Well, he helped me figure out what. I picked it. The bracelet had 3 charms. A small scales of justice for her career, a chess pawn for Jin, and a tiny enamel heart, on the back of which was engraved the date she and Junho had first spoken, not the date they'd reunited, but the first date, the terrace, the argument about the shipping company, the beginning. Dad said every chapter of your story matters, Jin said, not just the ones he was in. Zara pulled her son into her arms and held him for a long moment, her face in his hair, her carefully constructed composure entirely abandoned. You are, she said, the best thing that has ever happened to me. I know, Jin said, muffled against her shoulder. I'm also the reason your hair appointment got moved twice this month, so it's balanced. She laughed. She walked down the aisle with her father on one side and Jin on the other. I'm ensuring quality, he had explained. Not giving you away, that's a complicated construct. And at the altar, Junho took her hands and said, I have loved you since I was 24 years old, and I did not do it well enough in the beginning. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing it better. Not because I owe it to you, though I do, but because you are the most interesting person I have ever met, and I have been paying attention since the first night you told me I was wrong about something. Zara barely got through her vows. She managed it. When they kissed, Jin started the applause. Finally, he said, to no one in particular, in a tone of immense professional satisfaction. The question of Seoul came up, as Jin had predicted it would, at the reception. I've been waiting for you to bring it up, Zara said to Junho, when they found a quiet moment against the edge of the dance floor. I was building to it, he said. How did you know? You've been checking my reaction to the city for the last 3 days. Testing the temperature, he smiled. Your perceptiveness is unnerving. I learned from the best, she said, nodding toward Jin, who was across the room explaining something to Hyeja with the aid of a napkin and what appeared to be a fork held as a pointer. You don't have to decide anything tonight, Junho said. I know. Zara looked around the room, at the people who had come to witness this, at the city visible through the tall windows, at the life being offered to her. Not demanded, offered. But I think I already have. Yeah? Seoul has good corporate law firms, she said. Jin has already identified 3 international schools with gifted programs. He sent me a spreadsheet at 11 p.m. 3 weeks ago. A pause. I want my son to know both halves of himself. I don't want to split him across 2 cities for the next 12 years. And you? Junho asked. What do you want for yourself? I want to stop choosing between the things I love. She looked at him. You offered me that. I'm taking you up on it. From across the room, Jin appeared at her elbow with the supernatural timing that had characterized his entire existence. I've already begun coordinating the logistics of the move, he announced. I've identified a neighborhood with optimal schools, commute times, and access to green space. I've also spoken to Kim Yeon Soo at Hanan Associates about a potential position for you, Mama. She seemed interested. You've already spoken to. Preparatory conversations, Jin said. Nothing binding. He straightened his bow tie. Though she did say, and I quote, that she'd been hoping to poach you for 2 years and was very glad I called. Junho pressed his hand to his mouth. Jin, Zara said. Mom, Jin said, equally patient. You cannot conduct my job search. I conducted a preliminary inquiry. You conduct the actual job search. He looked at her with his father's eyes and something that was entirely his own. I'm trying to help. She looked at her son, at the small person who had marched across a hotel lobby in a burgundy tie and changed everything, who had mediated his parents' reunion with the calm efficiency of someone who had always believed it would work out, who had built the framework for this family one. Spreadsheet and chess game and quiet, brave hug at a time. I know you are, she said. I know. 3 months later, they moved. The house Jin had selected was in a quiet neighborhood in Mapo-gu, close enough to the Han River that you could see it from the kitchen window on clear days. It was not the Kwan estate. Jin had specifically advised against that, citing the importance of nuclear family independence in early relationship consolidation phases, but it was large enough and beautiful and theirs. Jin organized his new room the first morning. Books by subject. Chessboards set up by the window. Suits hanging in the closet, arranged by weight of fabric for seasonal appropriateness. He came downstairs in his Seoul foreign school uniform, navy blazer, crisp shirt, a small concession to institutional dress codes that he had evaluated and found acceptable if not ideal, and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at both of them. Ready, he said. We know you are, Zara said. Junho was waiting at the door. He crouched down to Jin's level. First day, he said. How do you feel? Jin considered the question with genuine attention, the way he considered everything. Ready, he said again. And then, quieter, is it normal that it feels different here? Like something's different, but I don't know what? Junho looked at his son. That's what home feels like when it's new, he said. You get used to it. It just becomes home. Jin absorbed this. Okay, he said, in a tone that suggested he was filing it for reference. He walked to the door. Stopped. Looked back at Zara. Blue folder, not red, he said. Your 10 o'clock meeting, the contract revisions are in the blue one. I checked your briefcase last night. Jin, she said. I know, he said. You can handle it. I just like to make sure. He adjusted his backpack. Also, grandmother Hyeja is calling at 7. She wants to continue the Korean lesson. Don't forget. I won't forget. You forgot last week. I had a brief moment. You have many brief moments, Jin said, not unkindly. That's why I maintain the calendar. And then he walked out the door, into the Seoul morning, into the first day of the rest of everything. Zara stood in the kitchen after they left. The Han River caught the morning light outside the window. She could hear, distantly, the sounds of a city going about its business, the particular rhythm of Seoul, which was different from Chicago's rhythm but not worse. Different the way a second language is different, strange at first, then beautiful, then yours. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jin sent from the car. Mom, I know you're standing in the kitchen thinking about everything. Stop. You did it. We're here. Jay. She looked at the message for a long moment. She thought about the 22-year-old who had fled this city in the dark, terrified and pregnant, certain she was making the right choice and heartbroken that it was necessary. She thought about the years between then and now, the law school nights, the bar exam, the first apartment she could afford, the suit she bought Jin because he insisted, and she let him because the joy on his face when he wore them was too real to argue with. She thought about a hotel lobby, a burgundy tie, a small voice asking a dangerous man why he was staring. She replied, I'm fine. Go learn something. 3 dots. Then, already ahead of you. Junho's teaching me the Sicilian counter on the drive. I've identified 2 improvements, Jay. She laughed. She put down her phone. She made coffee and stood at the window and looked at the river and thought, this is what it feels like when the story is done and the real life begins. Not the end of something. The start of everything that comes after. That evening, the 4 of them sat around the dinner table. Zara, Junho, Jin, and Hyeja, who had arrived precisely at 6 with Japke and a running commentary on Jin's Korean pronunciation that Jin received with respectful attention and the quiet certainty that he would correct every noted error within the week. The meal timing is inefficient, Jin was explaining. If we prep the banchan on Sunday evenings, we save approximately 40 minutes across weekday dinners and increase the quality of family conversation time by removing the distraction of active cooking. He's optimizing family dinner, Junho murmured to Zara. I heard that, Jin said. I know, Junho said. He is exactly like you at that age, Hyeji said to Junho, with the serene satisfaction of a woman who has waited many years to deliver this observation. Insufferable and brilliant. I prefer precocious, Jin said. I prefer precocious, Junho said, at the same moment. Jin looked at his father. Junho looked at his son. They both looked at Zara, who had her phone out and was taking a picture of all of them, the ordinary, extraordinary chaos of a table full of people who had found each other the long way around. Don't post that, Jin said. I'm keeping it for myself, she said. She looked at the photo. She looked at her family. Outside, Seoul held its breath and then exhaled, the way cities do in the evening when the day has been too full and the night hasn't started yet. And in the space between those two things, in the kitchen, at the table, with japchae and bad puns and a 6-year-old who scheduled everything and missed nothing, Zara Ellison Kwan thought. I ran away scared. I came back strong, and somewhere in between, without planning it, I built exactly the life I was looking for. Some stories start in hotel lobbies with a small boy in a burgundy tie asking a dangerous man why he's staring. Some stories end at dinner tables where everyone is talking at once and the food is getting cold and the kid is already planning next week's logistics. And the man you love is looking at you across the table like you are still, after everything, the most interesting person he has ever met. Some stories don't end at all. They just become your life. And your life, it turns out, is more than enough.